Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. Hi. Hello. My name's Karen Minns. I'm a policy manager at the SRA, and I'm going to be talking to you today about continuing competence. This session is being recorded and it's also being live streamed, and there'll be an opportunity to ask questions at the end of the session. So, this is my first face-to-face real-life conference in nearly 2 years. Like many of us, I've had 2 years of talking to people on Zoom, accidentally being on mute, talking over people and dropping out altogether. So while I am a little bit nervous about today, hopefully we won't be faced with any of those particular challenges. We're just going to have to see how we negotiate the headsets. But what presenting on Zoom and on Teams and on Google Mail has taught me is that I can continue to learn and to grow and to develop into my role as I'm faced with new and different challenges. So I'm not a solicitor, but I am a conscientious professional. And so when I drive home today, I'll be reflecting on how today went, whether there was anything that I could have done better or I might do differently next time, and whether I need to do any extra learning and development to deliver a better presentation next time. So I know that as a solicitor or somebody who supports solicitors and firms in maintaining their competence, that you too are diligent and you're conscientious and you're looking to understand how to address your learning and development needs around our competence requirements. So I'm going to provide you with a little reminder of how to meet those requirements today. I'm also going to talk a bit about what we found that solicitors are doing in practice to meet our competence requirements, and provide you with a summary of the resources that we have available and a summary of some reviews that are happening in this area at the moment. So why is your ongoing competence important to us as a regulator? Why don't we just check you when you're admitted and then leave you to get on with it? Well, one of the main reasons is consumer protection. So there are clients who can recognise when they're not getting a great service and they'll go elsewhere. But there are plenty who are unable to, who might not be able to recognise that, who might not have the time or the resources to be able to go elsewhere. So we've got to ensure that we maintain standards for those clients. We've also got to encourage an open and diverse marketplace, and we've got to ensure access to justice. So in both cases, we don't want to set standards so high that they discourage individuals and organisations for delivering legal services. So it's about finding the balance of a strong enough standard that doesn't put people off. And underpinning our approach is being proportionate. So we've got to make sure that what we do in this area and any area of a regulation is based on evidence of a problem, and that we're going to address a problem that we've identified, because we don't want to impose unnecessary burdens and then drive up costs. So what do we expect of solicitors and firms? Well, at a basic level, it's that all solicitors and firms deliver a proper standard of service to their clients. And to do this, solicitors and firms have to meet the standards that we set out in our competence statement. And to do that, they have to keep their skills and their knowledge up to date. So our codes for both individuals and firms are clear that maintaining your competence is a regulatory requirement. So we can take action against this if we feel that people are failing. But what competence in practice means is going to change throughout your career. So it will depend on the role or the stage that you're at, or as we've all found out, whether we're in the midst of a pandemic or not. But at each point, we expect solicitors to reflect on their practice, plan their training and development, take appropriate steps to address their learning and development, and record and evaluate the activities. So meeting the requirements in this area doesn't have to be separate from your day job and your core work, but taking each of these steps we think is really vital to maintaining your competence. So I'm going to look at each of those in turn in a bit more detail. So as I mentioned at the beginning, I think we're all reflecting constantly. Is there anybody here who has never finished a meeting or closed a case file and thought about how it went and what went well and what didn't go so well and what they might do differently next time. I'm going to pause and see if anyone's going to admit to it, but I don't think they are, because we're all doing it constantly. But when we've looked at training records, we've found that reflection is still quite a tricky concept for solicitors, or at least recording this is. So one of the things that I want you to think about after today's session is how you record that reflection that you're already clearly doing. The really good records that I've seen include some sort of a template or a checklist against the competencies for a role or the competence statement itself. And there's some recognition by the individual completing the record of any gaps against those competencies, and then there's a plan for addressing them. So if yeah, well, I think you're right that it's a concept that we all need to be working on, because I think we're doing it. So just to say that, I mean, if you are reflecting, to make sure that you're writing it down, and to make sure that what you're doing evidences that you're taking steps to address any of the gaps that you did identify in your reflection. So the next step is planning your learning and development. So thinking about and planning to address your learning and development is really important, because it helps you identify and set your priorities. There's lots of ways that you can do this, and you or your employer are likely to have an approach or a system that works for you. But from the training records that I've seen, it's really clear that a commitment to learning and development goes firm-wide. So I know that if I'm presented with a pile of training records, from the very first one that I see, I know whether the others in the pile are going to be any good or not. So I think it's really important that firms set this example from the top. To help you plan to address your development, you should think about these questions on the board here. So what you need to do, why you need to do it, when you're going to do it, and how you're going to do it. And then you need to prioritize your learning and development. And it's really important that you record your thinking about this. So one way of doing this is through a development plan. It doesn't need to be a complicated document, but you should write down and record somewhere what you plan to do to address your learning and development needs over a set time period, so 3 or 6 or 12 months, and why you're going to do it. We've got a template available to help you with this on our website, but there are lots of other resources out there that don't necessarily need to be from the legal sector. So, addressing your learning and development needs. We know from a recent survey that we did that almost all solicitors undertake some form of formal training every year. I think while this is fantastic, it's really worth remembering that any approach to learning and development is valid as long as you can demonstrate that it contributes to you remaining competent to deliver a proper standard of service. So I would say think about the development activities that you can do alongside any formal training courses. You can also tailor your learning and development to suit your learning style, but it's important to turn your learning into doing something differently in your job. And I'm going to talk a bit more about the findings of the survey later, but I think it's worth saying here that the pandemic did prompt lots of solicitors to access training and development in different ways they had considered in the past. So accessing webinars and conferences at convenient times, using podcasts, and I hope that you're able to access some of those in the way that I enjoyed doing during the pandemic. So the final step in the cycle is about recording and evaluating the activity that you've done to address your learning and development needs. We recently called in the training records of solicitors practicing in the youth courts to review, and we can look at these as part of our AML work and as part of our wider thematic work. So we're currently undertaking a thematic review of firms providing immigration services, and as part of the visits to those firms, we are asking to see training records. So a training and development record is just a really simple way of demonstrating to us that you take the obligations in the code to maintain your competence and provide a proper standard of service seriously. So it's important to keep your records in order. Again, we don't prescribe a specific approach, but there's a template that you can use that's available on our website. I think it's also really important to evaluate your learning and development activity after you've done it, and that'll help you identify any key points that you can introduce into your practice, or whether you might need further learning and development. So I've looked at a number of training records recently, and I've read lots of great personal reviews of training courses, so telling me how nice a trainer was or how interesting a webinar was. But leaving that kind of TripAdvisor style review on your training record isn't the same as thinking about and reflecting on whether the course met your learning and development needs. So, you know, you're very welcome to leave me a 5-star TripAdvisor style review of today, we'll see. But if you're using this session to help you meet an identified learning and development need, you need to think about whether you've walked away from here with a clearer understanding of how to shape your learning and development to meet our competence requirements. You've thought about how you're going to record that information, and you're going to be doing something differently as a result of today. Or if this talk hasn't met your learning and development needs in this area, then I'm sorry, and come and have a chat with me afterwards. But can you then use that thought to identify where and what further learning and development you might need to achieve the goal that you originally set out? Today might also highlight a learning and development need that you weren't previously aware of, which you should also record. So moving on from the cycle of competence, we undertook a survey in June to find out how solicitors were meeting our competence requirements and how these had changed and adapted during the pandemic. So as you can see from the survey, almost everybody plans for and addresses their learning and development needs. We also know that almost everybody reviews changes in law, in practice, in regulation to support their learning and their development and their competence. And as I said earlier, almost everybody's undertaking some form of formal training each year. So the results do suggest that there don't seem to be any issues with solicitors finding and undertaking training and development, but our other work has shown that not everybody is recording that they're doing all of this formally. So it's really important to think about what you and your firm can do to show your workings out to us, to show us that you've thought about any gaps that need filling with reference to the competence statement or the competencies for your role. This doesn't only help demonstrate that you're meeting our requirements to us, but we think it will also help you provide a better standard of service to your clients, and it helps maintain standards in the profession as a whole. So we know that resources are really key in this area, and we've got a number of resources available to help you with this. The competence statement itself is a learning tool, so you can use it to reflect on your competence within the context of your role and practice. It will help you identify any gaps in your competencies and identify any future training and development needs. So lots of the good training records that I've seen use the competence statement as the basis for developing a training plan. We've also got a toolkit of resources on our website, so that includes some case studies to help in-house solicitors, small firms and sole practitioners meet our requirement, and as I've mentioned, there's also the templates available. Our enforcement strategy has got a topic guide for competence and standard of service, which is worth looking at, and we've also recently updated resources for solicitors practicing in the coroner's courts, and we've got specialist resources for those practicing in the youth courts too. So while they are aimed at those particular areas, they're also quite useful resources to have in general. But we are looking to update and refresh our resources, so any thoughts that you have about how we can better support you in this area, please do come and have a chat with me after this session, or with my SRA colleagues at the SRA stand, because we're really keen to hear from you about what would be useful here. So finally, just to update you briefly on a couple of reviews that are taking place in this area. We're currently undertaking a strategic review of our approach to continuing competence, which is taking place over the next few years. And our review coincides with a review of ongoing competence being undertaken by our oversight regulator, the Legal Services Board. The Legal Services Board has undertaken consumer research that shows that consumers expect there to be ongoing checks on competence throughout a solicitor's career. We've looked at our approach to competence, we've looked at our data, and we've looked at what other regulators do in this area. And at this stage, we don't think that our work will lead to a significant change to our framework for competence, so we don't expect to change the competence statement. And we already undertake checks in some areas, so I've mentioned the thematic reviews, and we can also follow up on the competence declarations at PCRE. But as well as this, we're also considering whether there might be some other activities we can do in this area to get assurance. So, for example, we may do some more reviews of training records. We're also considering how we can ensure that third-party feedback is included in the reflective step of the competence process. So if you're interested in the LSB's work in this area, then I suggest looking out for their consultation, which is being published in December. And if you're interested in being involved in our work, as I said, do come and have a chat with us. So just to summarise before we move on to questions, I think it's clear that you probably are already doing a lot of this, but hopefully this was a helpful reminder of what we expect and some of the findings from our recent work. I think if you take one thing away from today, is that you make sure you record what you're doing, particularly any reflection and evaluation that you're doing of your training and development. I think it's also really important to ensure that your training record evidences the steps that you're taking to address any learning and development needs. We've got lots of resources available to help support you, but we are looking to improve these and refresh them. So if there's anything that you think it would be helpful for us to add, then please do, or want to get involved, then please do let me know. And I'm about for any technical questions that you have afterwards, but otherwise over to you for any general questions. Thank you. Sorry, just. Yes, that is, yeah. We think that it might be helpful to provide some guidance about incorporating client feedback into your reflection piece particularly, yeah. Sorry, after saying that we weren't going to get technical issues, we appear to be having technical issues. Should we try it? There we go. There any other questions? Okay. Well, as I said, if you're interested in being involved in our work in this area, please do come and have a chat with me. And I'm about this afternoon, so it'd be great to talk to you about this further. Thank you very much.